Hello, I'm Charles Malet with a UK column interview, and today I'm joined by Sam Sorbo, who is an accomplished broadcaster, author, and public speaker. She has home educated her three children, and she describes herself as an education freedom advocate. Sam Sorbo, thank you very much indeed for joining me, and a warm welcome to UK column.
Well, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Good. Now, there's a lot to get into, and I'm very interested in your personal story. But I think for the benefit of the audience, we should start by defining terms. And I've just referred to home education. What I'd like you to do is set out what you see as the difference between school or schooling and education.
Well, you just picked the $60 million question. That is the question that faces us today is what is education and how does that differ from schooling? And so, of course, I grew up in the United States, so all of my experience pretty much is relevant to the United States, although I did attend school in Sweden for a year. I went to high school, my senior year of high school in Sweden. Um, so let's talk about, and by the way, I just want to say that defining terms is something that is a debate sort of technique, and it's not something that we take very seriously in the United States too often. And so I'm often, encouraging people to get down to brass tacks and define their terms. So, what do we mean by education? What we ought to be meaning by education is raising a child to adulthood to be a valuable member of society and family, right? Community. And that's not the way that the school defines education. The school defines education as college prep and career readiness. And I'm making broad strokes. Of course, individuals have their own little definitions and stuff, but I try to go more broad because we're talking to a large audience. And so these are the broad strokes of what we're talking about. And I say that schools school, but they don't educate. Why? Because the school doesn't teach a child how to be an adult. In fact, to the extent now that we have a new word, it's a verb, adulting, to adult. As in, I don't know how to do this. Oh, I guess I'm adulting now because I had to pay my first car payment or I had to sign a lease for my new apartment or whatever. And that's actually become part of our vernacular now because we're turning out children from college who can't hold a job, much less have a career, because they haven't been taught the basics of what it means to be a contributing citizen. And and not even the basics here in the United States of what citizenship really entails. They can't define rule of law. They don't understand the Constitution or the amendments to the Constitution or how government works. And so you now have a young population that is begging the government to take care of their student debt because they were basically coerced into going to college, borrowing a ton of money to get a degree that has very little value for which they can't provide payments. So I hope that goes a little way to answer your question. I don't want to get too long-winded.
No problem with that at all. But no, I think what you've done there is encapsulate what almost everybody in our UK column audience who lives in what we are told is the developed world will be looking at the younger generation and thinking. So I think you've articulated that absolutely brilliantly. And like you said at the beginning, I mean, this is such a critical part of it is that we are told that even though what you've described is clearly not the right outcome, we are told that in actual fact it is the system that should prevail. To go back, therefore, now that we have done what we've described as defining terms, you've referred a little bit to your time in Sweden, but you have experienced home education via what you've done with your own children and indeed your sort of career now. But for you, growing up and going through that experience, what was your feeling on that at the time, and then with the benefit of hindsight?
Well, I hated school, and I was a good student. I was near the top of my class. I was gifted. I was advanced. I hated every moment of it. I probably had the most truancy of any of the children in school because my mother would write me notes for staying home because I just didn't feel like going to school that day. I found school to be terribly boring. And I fear, and I'm convinced that a lot of children find school to be boring or frustrating, or at least unsatisfying. And yet, we insist on sending our children back into that system because somehow the system has convinced us that we're the outliers. Everybody else loves it. And of course, that's not true. But we think somehow that, well, the system clearly didn't work for me because I'm incapable of educating my own children. But it's going to work for my kids, even though it's much worse now than it was when I went to school. And unfortunately, that's really a logic pretzel that you're never going to unravel. It makes no sense. And we ought to be ashamed for allowing ourselves to go through those mental gymnastics, especially when it comes to sacrificing our children, which is what we're doing. We're sacrificing our children. A typical school career from K through 12 in the United States anyway is about 16,000 hours. I imagine it's roughly the same over in your neck of the woods. And that's 16,000 hours you'll never get back.
Yeah.
That you submit your child to a system. And by the way, I don't know of any other culture that institutionalizes healthy children. We are robbing children of their childhoods, and we're almost gleefully doing so. It's as if we hate them, as if we're jealous of them for having childhood and being innocent. We're robbing them of their innocence in their childhoods. We send them to school and then we give them homework when they get home from school. You will not have playtime, you silly child. Shame on you for even wanting to play. And now we have a researcher who is making great inroads, Jonathan Haidt, who's talking about how we sacrificed the play-based childhoods and replaced them with phone-based childhoods. And I agree that we've given children phones too early, but we sacrificed play-based childhoods, full stop. Like we replaced them with homework, and then the phones. And so it was an easier transition. It's very sad to me.
It is very sad. We'll come on to the tech side of things a little bit later. Now, you've obviously described your own feelings on the system as it was when you went through it, and you have done something about that for the next generation in your family. Do you remember at the time having any sense that things could be different? I mean, what was your learning experience that led you to the points of view that you now have? What triggered that?
Nothing. Nothing in my schooling triggered that. The only thing well, okay, I'll tell you the genesis, if we want to go back that far. So I attended Duke University and I was studying biomedical engineering, and I was working on an ulcer because the pressure was on me to earn money. And I was the fourth of four girls from a single mother. We left my father when I was a year old, so she was terribly insecure financially. She had never graduated college, so I was raised with this impetus to graduate college and get a career and make a lot of money, and everything else was secondary. And of course, the school piled on to that. So even though I wanted to become an actress, that was not possible because it wasn't a stable career. It wouldn't pay off. It just wasn't an option. College, medicine, become a doctor, that whole thing. And I realized during my second year of college that I was working on an ulcer, and I needed to take some time off. So I ended up modeling for a year and earning a ton of money. I was very successful. I also learned French. I traveled the world. It was phenomenal. And I went back to college and I took the hardest courses I'd ever taken because they were interesting to me, but I aced them without even lifting a finger because the pressure was off. And so I realized a couple of things. My anxiety inhibited my learning, which is what I tell parents. So you send your child to sit in a vat of children, and there are all kinds of pressures there and all kinds of anxiety provocations there. And those are inhibitors to learning. And then you demand that the child learn. We play a very dangerous game. That's damaging to children, I would say. But the second thing that I realized is I could do everything else that I wanted to do and earn a lot of money and not go into debt And so I decided to do that. So I dropped out of college. And it was shortly after that that I realized that I had done everything the system had taught me to do, and I earned the money, and my bank account was swollen, and I felt pretty good about myself. But I had no purpose in life. I was completely lost. I was like, well, I might as well just kill myself because really, what is life about if I've already achieved the goal that they set out for me? Why am I here? And so at that point, I went on a search for meaning. So so all that fed into when I was educating my children academically and really focused on the academics because, as I said, I was an academic. I just didn't like the system. I was really focused on academics for them. And I slowly realized education is about so much more than academics. It's about showing your child how to hold the door open for somebody because it's polite. It's the right thing to do. About teaching them that we return the wallet with all the money in it because the money also doesn't belong to us. It's about not stealing. It's about all of the other things, character formation. And I would argue it's first and foremost character formation because without character, why would you want to learn academics? You need the care. It's hard. Some of academics are challenging. Why would you step up to the challenge if you don't have the character or the integrity to desire that for yourself? So at this point in the United States, we're like 40th in the world out of 40 developed nations or whatever. The academics are failing. And in part, I'm sure that that is because we aren't teaching character at all. We're not teaching any kind of morality or virtue except survival of the fittest, which when it boils down to it, it's bullying.
Yeah, indeed. Now, the idea of education as we think of it now, or sorry, to be more precise, schooling, really doesn't go back very far. I mean, for Americans in 1902, John Rockefeller set up the General Education Board, and it was he that said, "I don't want a nation of thinkers. I want a nation of workers." To what extent does that pervade the culture surrounding academia today?
Well, I can break it down for you. We learn four basic things in school tacitly. There are four basic lessons that are imported to us rather than being taught to us. The first one comes when you first go to school. You're a little kid, you're curious about everything, you're asking questions about everything. And the first thing they tell you is sit down and shut up. And if you have a question, you must first ask permission to ask that question. That is anti-learning. It's anti-child. It's a barrier to entry. You must you must cause attention on yourself. You have to draw attention to how dumb you are that you have a question. It's intimidation. And so that lesson is don't ask. Don't ask questions. The second lesson is don't read. The teacher read the book. She's going to tell you what's in it. Just sit there and imbibe what she is giving you, like a baby bird. Just let her feed you. So don't read. Don't try because failure's bad. Failure is the worst. You get the red letter F, the class laughs at you, the teacher makes fun of you because you failed. So don't try. Okay? And then the last one is don't think. Just put on the test what the teacher told you the answers were and don't challenge the teacher because she's the teacher, she's the authority. And so those are the four basic foundational elements that we learn that we just by rote we learn them in school. Don't try, don't think, don't read, and don't ask. And all of those are anti-education, which is sort of at its core, at least, the search for understanding. And it all begins with a question, a quest for knowledge, right? It starts with a question. And those four questions are never to be uttered in the classroom. basically. And then, of course, you have the teacher that says, no question, there are no stupid questions, which, of course, we all know right on the surface, that's a lie. So why is she lying to us? Because, of course, there's a stupid question. You could ask me right now what the weather is here. It's kind of a stupid question. Nobody cares what the weather is outside my closed window, right? And so, we have to stop lying to ourselves that what is happening in our schools passes for education. Now, let me just add the caveat. I don't go after teachers. I think teachers, by and large, many teachers, maybe most teachers, are fabulous people who really just want to teach children. They just really love to impart knowledge to kids. And then there are the bad teachers also. But it's the system, right? The system tells the child to sit down and shut up. The system tells the child that the teacher is the authority, the teacher is the spigot of knowledge, and creates a dependency in the child for a teacher so that when you hit a roadblock in life and you're like, I don't know how to solve this, and there's no way for me to know because there's no teacher that I can ask how to solve this problem. So we create a nation of people who can't think outside the box. They've been institutionalized for 13 plus years, and they don't know how to problem solve because they've never actually been hit with a problem. They've been hit with questions and answers. So the whole system is the issue. And you brought up Rockefeller, and there were plenty of others who saw the system as a way of co-opting the citizens of the nation to create workers and consumers. And unfortunately, the whole, economy runs on the backs of these workers and consumers. But we're going to grind to, I won't say we're going to grind to a halt, but we will start grinding down if we don't create some problem solvers.
Yeah, indeed. No, and well, I think you make a really pertinent distinction there between the system and the teacher. I'm sure the majority of people listening to this will have experienced formal education at some point, and therefore will be able to think of people who were within that system who genuinely seem to be acting for their benefit, for the good. So I think there's a point very well made. Concentrating on the system and what it does bring about, and I'd like your take on this. In the United Kingdom, there is still a stigma attached to the idea of home education. Now, this is either cultural, you see it in films or television series, the people that are involved in home education are a bit odd, or that's where the trouble starts, or these sorts of tropes. And in legislation now, we have many references to home education being, in effect, the domain of troubled children. It's as though
Hmm.
they are not resilient enough to go into the
Right.
state education system. Is this a similar thing in the States, or how does this manifest?
Yeah, so it was. So in the, say, the 70s, there were the oddball kids who just, no matter what, they just wouldn't get on in school. They were terribly bullied, or they were too slow, or they were too smart. And so the parents eventually, would decide the school, it's just not working. We're just going to have to homeschool. And so that created here in the United States this stigma that they were the weirdos, or the parents did it for ultra religious reasons, cult reasons, or whatever. And so they were the outliers. And so the stigma developed. These days, it's just been obliterated because so many families have discovered the joy of the family unit and the way that, in a sense, the way that God intended the family to run. And when you keep your children home and you develop that relationship with them, you notice all of the trappings of the struggles of the world sort of fall to the side. So, I've said this, and people often push back. Teenagers don't rebel, but we live in a culture where the culture simply believes that teenagers rebel because teenagers have gone to school for so long and have been trained to think of their parents as less than. Because honestly, if the parents were equal to the educators, then the parents would teach the kids themselves, wouldn't they? I mean, the underlying message to the child is, I can't, so trust them. And so the child then trusts them as the ultimate authority, and the parents fall under that. They cede their authority. And of course, their authority is going to be challenged. My authority was never challenged. My husband's authority has never been challenged in our home. And okay, I say never. That's a little bit of hyperbole. Basically, our kids don't challenge our authority because they trust us and they know that we want what's best for them, and we've always been the authority. And so, and I will, and I tell people this when my children were teenagers, the culture says, "Oh, how old are your kids?" And I said, "Well, I have three teenagers." And the person typically says, "Oh, wow, you've got your hands full, ooh, three teenagers. Those are the tough years." And I'm like, I have no idea what you're talking about, because on any given evening, if I were in bed alone, my husband travels a lot. One of my children would come in softly, knocking on the door, and sit down on the edge of my bed and pour out their day to me because they want that relationship. And, they're telling me silly teenage stuff, but it's important to me. I close my computer, I put it to the side, and I have a conversation with my child. And that's the relationship that I've developed with my children. And I would never have had that if I had submitted them to a system. And my husband admits it. He loved school. He was, the popular jock, the guy, good student, but got along with everybody. And he had a fabulous time at school, but he also recognizes that his relationship with his parents and his siblings suffered because you can't maintain that kind of relationship. You can maintain it in a marriage because you're both adults, but children need their parents. Children need that pouring in. They've never done this before.
I think that's a point really well worth holding in mind. And I know you talk a lot specifically about the role of the parent and how incredibly important that is, and how it is, that relationship is denied by the system. Now, you used the word pushback a moment ago, and the problem is, in some senses, this is turned into a divisive issue because we are supposed to believe that stepping outside of the system is the wrong thing to do. And in describing the benefits of home education, not just to the family, but also back to society, there is, in a sense, an implicit criticism of parents that are putting their children into the system. And I'm certain that you would hear a lot of parents saying, "Oh, well, we would like to do it, but." How do those conversations turn out with you?
Well, sorry, I just have to pick up on we are supposed to believe. Brilliant, right? That's just great. We're supposed to believe something. And it's the system that wants you to believe it, right? Because that's what that means. And why would the system want you to believe that the system is the best solution? Job security. Plus, they trained you to believe that they were the solution for 13 years. They had you from K through 12 or, however long, right? And so now it's difficult to not conform because you yourself was schooled to conform. That's one of the other big lessons in school is don't stand out, conform, lest lest you draw attention to yourself, lest people notice you, lest people tease you for being nonconformist or whatever. For good or for bad, I'm a bit of a social pariah. I'm a bit of a nonconformist. And so when you say the words, "you're supposed to believe," I bristle at that. I don't care what I'm supposed to believe. I care about truth. And I will tell you that my stance is not an easy one to hold, but it is the truth. So yeah, there are a lot of parents who feel like I judge them. I don't judge them, I pity them. I pity parents who submit their children away from them because those parents have no idea what they're sacrificing and they are losing their children every day. And that makes me sad. And it makes me sad for the children who are being abused by a system that insists on lying to them. I think that it is cruel and unusual to lie to a child who only wants to find truth. I think that that's mean. And I think that parents who just throw up their hands and say, "But I just don't know how," or "I can't," or "it's too expensive." I I I want to say shame on you because I think you're better than that. You should be better than that. It's your child whose life is at stake. Erica Komisar is a researcher and a child and a family psychologist, psychiatrist, something. And her research is now showing that children who fail to bond with their mothers from 0 to 3, who fail to form good attachments with their caregivers, and that would be the mother, because when you submit a child to daycare, those caregivers rotate. There's no stability there. And so a child that doesn't get the opportunity to bond at that early age is set up for all kinds of relationship struggles later in life as an adult. And in order to, and by the way, this is her job security, right? Because she deals with the adults who are struggling through the fact that their mother didn't love them or didn't pay attention to them or whatever. And so we have no idea that the hardships that we are inflicting on our own children because the system says, do this with your child. The system's an idiot. This education system, school system that we've had for 120 years, not longer. This system is the experiment. You're the guinea pig. I'm the guinea pig. Our children are the guinea pigs. Now they're the guinea pigs for gender reassignment therapies called healthcare. Shame on them. Our children should not be guinea pigs. Our role as parents, our primary role is to protect our children from the evildoers. And unfortunately, we are literally bringing our children to the slaughter.
There's so many questions that we should really sort of tease out of that. I think the to describe the system as an idiot is going to be quote of the interview so far. I can't see anyone disagreeing with that. So well done on that one. In actual fact, it's very interesting. You're quite right to be sort of lit up by the suggestion that this is what we're supposed to believe. I say that very deliberately because it's so obvious that these sorts of messages are put out. And I'd be interested in your take on this. In 2020, when we went through the coronavirus charade and children were removed from schools, it was almost as though that was with the express intent of creating such trauma within the household in throwing people together at a moment's notice who were sort of ill prepared for it and were
Yeah.
convinced that actually they shouldn't be doing it and therefore they didn't want to be doing it. It's almost the reaction to it was, okay, I thank goodness the schools are going to open again. I just want to get the children back onto the right track and all the rest of it. So I think from this side of the Atlantic, we're seeing a real push against a trend that is actually tending towards homeschooling. Are you seeing a similar thing, a sort of, in effect, a sort of a counter action to the homeschooling, home education trend, as it were?
Okay, so I'm seeing both over here because homeschooling was so well established by the time they banned children from schools. And so there were two schools of thought. There were two camps. The parents who absolutely hated the quote homeschooling that they were doing, which was not homeschooling, and that's what I tell them. You were thrown into a pit of vipers and told that you were homeschooling, and that's not what you were doing. Because and in fact I differ. So terms, right? I like to call it home education or home learning. I don't actually like to call it homeschooling because I don't want people to think it's school at home where the parent is the teacher with the finger at. Like I don't want them to get that image in their heads. Um, but I will say that homeschoolers doubled post COVID. So during COVID, it was like way high, and then it recalibrated a little bit when schools opened again. And it's kind of funny because when the schools closed, I was cheering, which is silly, right? But I was like, maybe parents will understand that the schools are no good for their children. But you're right. A lot of parents were like, I can't take my children anymore, which is so sad. Imagine being a child in that house and the parents are saying, well, I just can't wait till the school opens again and you can just go to school and be out of my hair. is it's so, I talked to a teacher years ago and I said, "Have you ever considered homeschooling?" She taught third grade and she and her children were roughly that age, those ages, around third grade. And she said, "Oh my gosh, I would kill my children by Wednesday if I homeschooled them." And I looked at her, I said, I didn't say this, but I thought, I wonder if the parents of the children in her class know that she speaks about her own children that way. And then there's the flip side. There are countless teachers who have left teaching because they refuse to put their children into that system. And principals who have left their jobs and or continue in their jobs but homeschool. And so, it's not enough to say, well, the system requires this of me, or the system is telling me that the system doesn't give a flip about your children. The system wants, okay, I'm trying to decide if so one thing that I say here in the States, because we have so many stories of it, is they want to have sex with your children. The system doesn't seem to have your child's best interests at heart. Let's put it that way. So why would you trust the system to tell you anything? The system's a dictator. I understand that parents out there have gone through the system and so they rely on the system, but they shouldn't. I'm here to wake them up and tell them the system doesn't want what's best for you and your child. The system wants to separate you from your child so that people can get at your child.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that's again another point very well made, and what you've just alluded to is the incredible harm that that children can be put in the way of, or that is put in their way.
Just a quick story. When COVID sort of hit and schools closed, a friend of mine sent me a video that his school had prepared for all the children in his very high level public elementary school. So in a very affluent area. Okay. So arguably this was the good school. This was the really good public school because that's where he sent his kid. And the video came over and it was maybe 40 minutes long. And it was a collection of short videos of all the teachers. And they all did this little video. Hi, everybody. I'm home. This is my dog, Jack. I'm taking Jack for walks. Remember to wash your hands. Don't forget to wear your masks. All of these videos telling the children to do the things that the CDC recommended, whatever. And I miss you and I can't wait to see you again. Not a single teacher out of 30 teachers or whatever, not a single teacher said, don't forget to look at your spelling words. Don't forget to keep reading in the book that we're reading in. Remember to, get your mom or dad to read to you from the, whatever. Nothing. Zero about actual academics. Not a single teacher and not the principal. I rest my case. They are about classroom management, behavior management, and some of that is torturing children with homework or torturing children with lectures. But it's not about real life. Your relationship with your child is more important than trigonometry. And I'm a mathematician. I happen to love math. I tutored calculus. That is hard for me to say, but it's the truth.
Yes, I mean the demise or the continued push for the splintering of the relationship between the parent and the child, as you say, is desperately sad, and nonetheless, that's what the system continues to push towards. Now, something I think you've just really hit upon there is how indoctrination is without doubt the weapon that leads to compliance and therefore the perpetuation of the state as it is. So, in effect, the decision to home educate is to, well, let's put this as a question, sorry, is it to set the child on a different pathway? And, how does one view that as a parent, in thinking, okay, if I remove a child from the system, in terms of education, schooling, and do this on in a home context, what are the life opportunities for that child? How do you encourage parents to think about that?
It's an interesting question, and I'm trying to sort of wrap around where you want to go with this. So let me start by saying this. Education is, to a certain degree, indoctrination. And by indoctrination, as we should define our terms, the indwelling of a doctrine into the child. What's a doctrine? A doctrine is a system of beliefs. It's a worldview. The doctrine in the schools today, and by the way, so I'm talking about America, right? We developed the schools. Initially, schools were developed to train children in virtue. They were given Bible verses for copy work to train them in morality and basically teach them how to read, do some ciphering or math, and that was basically it. And they were run by communities, and parents paid the teacher themselves, basically, because that seemed like a good way for community to serve the children and the families, getting a little bit of information into the child and some good ethics into the child, because we needed responsible citizens, because this country is made for a morally principled people, and nothing less will do, right? Then in the 60s, the pundits or the educators or whoever, the zealots came and said, hey, education is not indoctrination. It's not about doctrine. It's about academics. Get your Bibles out of the schools. And so we did. And then we got prayer out of the schools. And then education was all about academics. Now it's no longer about academics. In the state of Oregon, you will be graduated unable to read or do math. That's perfectly acceptable now. So it's clearly not about academics. In fact, in the state of New Jersey, this past January, they passed a new law that teachers did not have to be accredited or pass an exam to teach. So what are the teachers teaching? They're teaching doctrine. So we've come full circle. The problem is that the doctrine is evil. The doctrine is not truthful. The doctrine is a very bad worldview. And the worldview that the United States is intrinsically racist and should be torn down, the worldview that children can change their gender, the worldview that all of these very, very egregious things. So you should want to protect your child from that doctrine, but then you should think, well, what do I want my child to believe? What is the truth as I know it? And that might be whatever religion you pursue or whatever lack of religion you pursue, but you definitely have a worldview. You definitely have a religion, whether or not you're pursuing it, so-called. Everybody has a religion. We've come to accept that conservative parents often have very liberal children. No, that's a development of the system. The system is a very liberal, left-wing, left-leaning center, right? The teachers' colleges were taken over by the Marxists, and they turned out Marxist teachers, and now our schools are rampant with Marxists. And so we are graduating children who believe in socialism because that's what the teachers believe is best. And that's wrong. But if you believe in socialism, then you'd be fine sending your child to school in that sense, because they will come out believing as you do. But if you don't believe in socialism, it is not normal for your child to believe in socialism. It's a product of the system, and you should not be accepting of it. And I will tell you, countless parents have come to me, because I speak all over the place, and lamented the fact that they sent their child to college. And I said, but this happened long before college. You don't raise a child in a doctrine that the school is counter to and think that that doctrine will stick when they go to college. The doctrine was never really placed inside the child, because the school's doctrine, the school had the child for 16,000 hours. So when you get the child to church for an hour or two a week, don't think that that's going to prevail. Unless you're doing a lot of mitigation at home, it's not going to prevail. So yes, I think parents ought to take a step back and consider, why am I having children? What do I want for my children? What do I want for my life? Why am I going to sacrifice all of this money and time and trouble for these little people that I'm creating to do what? To so that they can get a job at Goldman Sachs and never come home for Christmas? Is that what I'm doing? And I mean, this is not how I started. I started because I didn't think that they were accomplishing education. For my oldest, when he went to first and second grade, I saw there were a bunch of flaws in the system, and it just didn't seem to be effective. So I took him out. But as I progressed over the next decade, I started really considering, so why am I doing this? So what is this about? And I realized that I want my children to believe what I believe because what I believe is the truth, at least as far as I know, right? Otherwise, I won't believe it. So my convictions ought to be their convictions. And I want grandchildren. Like I want family because I know that the school taught me money is the highest value, but the school's wrong. The system's wrong. The highest value is relationship. The highest value is that dash between the start date and the end date of your life. And there's no tombstone that says, I wish I spent more time at the office. The value of life is the relationships, it's service. And so I've raised my children to value those things. And it's counter to the way that I was raised, it's counter to my schooling, but it's the truth.
Yes, I mean, again, I can't see anybody disagreeing with that, and the the sort of passion underlying it, sort of incredible sort of rationale that you substantiate it with. To go back to what you said, the formal education system has been in place for, as you say, about 120 years, and therefore it can be no coincidence that the supranational control that we see in so many parts of the world, or at least expressing themselves so particularly, whether it's the World Health Organization or the United Nations or even the World Economic Forum or whatever, it's almost as though this could not have been possible without the formalization of the education system or the school system as has happened. But obviously there is another path, and that builds resilience, which of course is a great threat. The thing that you did allude to really early on that we haven't really talked about is sort of aside from all of this or enmeshed with all of this is the rise and rise and rise of technology, and now in particular artificial intelligence and social media and all these things. So insofar as you can remove children from the school system and you can provide that amazing uh, education within the home and have those relationships that you describe. What's your approach when it comes to technology? I know that's a big question, a big topic, but just sort of break it down whichever way suits.
Yeah, it's a tough one. I don't recommend smartphones for children. I don't recommend tablets for children. Um, if I were doing this again today, I would avoid all the technology and certainly all of the um, entertainment media that's being produced today, because it's nearly, if it's not, it's very close to demonic. There is so much sexual proclivity or whatever that's rampant through all of entertainment. And so I would just be very, very careful. When I was raising my kids, they weren't allowed to watch live action Disney. And the thing is that I know that parents struggle with, well, but what if everybody else is doing it? What you do is you galvanize your children and you train them to understand why your rules are your rules. And what happens is they become proud that they have been singled out to be exceptional. That's how you train your children to withstand the push of the culture, right? I did it wrong. My kids all got smartphones way too early, uh, at 12, but that was way too early, as smart as they were. And they did suffer, and they were resilient enough to recover, unbeknownst to me, frankly. So today I tell parents, don't even flirt with that. By the way, no sleepovers. No sleepovers, zero. Don't do it. Why? You don't know. You don't know. I don't care how much you trust the person, and I've been down that road and with people that I trusted intrinsically, and that was misplaced trust, and it was the wrong thing to do. So I'm trying to, educate parents from my own experience, but don't do that. Quick story, my son was part of a football team and he had to stay at the coach's house for a little extra, and the coach put on a scary movie for him and said, "Your mom probably won't want you to watch this." And my son told me about it. And I'm like, "You were there for half an hour. Couldn't he have just let you sit for half an hour? Why would he do that to you?" And my son was also upset because he saw things that he would never be able to unsee, and they were disturbing. So, you can protect your children. You should protect your children. And no, you're not being a helicopter parent. And by the way, that phrase is designed to intimidate you to make your children more vulnerable because they want to have sex with your children. Like, don't let them intimidate you into relaxing your guard over the innocence of your children. So the AI question is, now children in schools will be using AI to do their work for them, which will make them less and less resilient, stupider and stupider, and more apt for the sort of WEF world takeover or whatever's coming down the pike. But you can preserve your family. So do that. You can't do everything, but you can preserve your family. And that's my admonition for parents is family above everything else.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's coming through very much loud and clear. Now, to look sort of to the future, I mean, there is obviously a stronger, I would say, statistically, we were talking about this before we started recording, but I think a stronger, well, tradition is perhaps not quite the right word, but trend or proportion of home educated children in the United States than there is in the United Kingdom. But both seem to be on an upward trajectory. What effects do you see of that happening in, say, a generation's time if that trend continues? I mean, are you considering that there will be sort of societal positives from all of this that we will actually be able to identify?
I like to be optimistic. Uh, this nation was founded on freedom. You guys have a different legacy. Um, but we were founded by home educators, children who were autodidacts. They taught themselves everything, basically. And they never went to school, except some of them did go to university, right? Uh, and so that's our heritage. Uh, and we were founded by a minority. So I think that the preservation of the nation will depend on homeschoolers here because they are more freedom-minded than children who go to a system. And that's just the outcome of the system. It's not it almost doesn't matter what the teachers do. The system is the thing that has the greatest influence on the child. And systematizing the child has the biggest impact on the formation of that individual. And so anybody who stays outside the system, I mean, I said to Kevin after Braden, my oldest, went through second grade, I said to my husband, I think I could fail at homeschooling him, but he'll still be better off. And that was simply because he wasn't getting academics, but what he was getting was a bunch of crap that I didn't like. There were misbehaved children in his classroom. There was bullying. There was just a bunch of other stuff, and I didn't like that. And so I was like, well, even if he doesn't get the academics, he's still going to be better off. And I can give him at least a smattering of academics. And what I want people to understand, and this is why I wrote my book, my latest book, Parents Guide to Homeschool, is um, educating your child is just not that big a deal. It's just not that big a lift. What it ought to look like is the parents work, um, at least maybe one of them works from home. They contribute to their community, they do things together, and they are building their lives together in front of and including the children. That's education. Because the children, okay, to put it really bluntly, your child wants to be you. You're adult. You're cool. He wants to be you. Don't deprive him of that. Show him how to be you. Show him the best way to be the best version of himself as he approaches you. And the natural sort of differentiation that will happen, say, during the teenage years, where the child understands, oh, I actually want to go this direction with my life. I want to do these kinds of things as opposed to what dad does or as opposed to what mom does. That's the beauty. That's the beautiful part. Then you as a parent get to unwrap the gift that is your child and figure out how to help them accomplish the things that they dream of. That it's such a beautiful thing that we've robbed generations of. The loss of generational knowledge is mind-boggling because we all went to school. We didn't get to know grandma and grandpa. We didn't get to know our parents because we just were sent to school. And I think that if families can recapture that, we will become strong and resilient again. We've become weak and compliant, and it's not good for us. I mean, I'm sure you're watching what's happening, the discoveries that Doge is making of the fraud in the United States government. Of course, there's fraud in the government. These people were raised that money is the highest value. The moment they get to Washington, D.C., they go, okay, where's the till? I want my hands in it. I want to get some money. I mean, this is the normal outcome of an institutionalized love of money. And you can avoid that with your own family, and you can find like-minded people and form groups and co-ops for schooling if you want, or just groups for social things. I chose my children's friends. I chose them. I didn't do a terribly good job, but I could have done a lot worse letting them pick in the school. I remember my son had some friends, and they were rowdy, and they disregarded their mother's commands. And she was, she just asked them to keep it quiet, keep it down, stop making so much noise or whatever. And I finally said to my son, and by the way, I didn't do this with my other two children, but my son was very much a leader, my firstborn. And I said to him, listen, your friends there, they don't listen to their mother. And I can't afford to have you around that because I'm afraid it's going to influence you. So when you're with them, if they don't listen to their mother, that will be the end of your time with them. And so my son made them behave. And I didn't have to suffer him, reacting against me because he got used to his friends reacting against their mother.
It's an amazing story. It very much encapsulates the spirit of what you've
Oh,
been talking about.
he used to bring home the youth group from church.
Right.
You would think these were well-behaved young people. They were not. And the girls dressed like tarts. And I said to him, these young women need to come to the house with clothing on, or they will not be welcome. Now, you have two choices. You can tell them, put some clothes on before you come to my mother's house, or I will stand at the door with extra large t-shirts to hand out to everybody. They came dressed. At least to my house. Because you can have your own standards in the culture. I lived in Hollywood, for crying out loud. I had my own standards. And we can do this. We do not have to succumb to what the system demands.
Yeah. Absolutely, Sam. I mean, I agree entirely. Now, what I'm going to do is ask you a question that you ask your guests on your podcast, which is, what advice would you give to your younger self?
I would pick the time when I was first getting into home education. And I would try to convince myself, you've got plenty of time. There's no rush. Just enjoy reading with your children and don't focus so much on getting the curriculum into them because education is not data entry. Education is lighting a fire. Uh, and with that said, we did academics in the mornings, and my children were free, pretty much free in the afternoons. And that is what set them on the path of truth and of curiosity and an eagerness for life, which I could never have imagined for them because I didn't get it myself. And I'm so blessed that we managed to accomplish at least that.
Well, that's a terrific and poignant note to draw to a close on. Now, the audience will be very keen to find out where they can go to look at more of your work and find out what you're doing, and indeed to buy your book and look at all those sorts of things. Where should we direct people?
sorbostudios.com. I have the book here. This is the Parent's Guide to Homeschool, and it's a workbook for parents because you need to recalibrate the way you think about education because you've been schooled and the school taught you, trained you to think a certain way about what education is, and they're wrong. It's wrong.
Absolutely. Well, terrific, Sam. Thank you very much. And we will put notes to, well, certainly a lot of the things you've referred to, as well as your book and Sorbo Studios. There'll be links to that, to those things in the notes for this interview. And before I let Sam go, I will just say that if you are a follower of UK Column and you are in a position to support what we do financially in order that we are able to continue to bring interviews like this to you, then please do consider making a donation or taking out a membership at ukcolumn.org. But otherwise, I will just say to Sam Sorbo, thank you very much indeed for an incredibly enlightening and astonishingly wide-ranging discussion about a subject that is obviously not just of incredible significance to you, but to societies across the world at large. It's been a real pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.